Hi, I'm David Bradley, and this channel is Schizophreniforms, and today we are releasing, finally, after a 2-year gap, the third episode of Ask a Schizo. So to begin, the first question we have today is, what is the most effective tool you have to navigate your experiences? So there's a few different tools in my arsenal that help me survive the experience of being schizophrenic, and one I learned from Buddhism and meditation in general, which was a profoundly useful technique, and specifically the technique of mindfulness, is this kind of non-resistance attitude. So like, say for example, if I'm having like quite a vivid, unpleasant hallucination, the worst thing I've discovered that I can do is just to try and ignore it or block it out. Like, there's reason to try and do that if it's like incredibly severe, but in the long term, when you're going through the progress of like kind of trying to navigate your way out of it, ultimately you realise that the more you push away, the more you kind of resist the hallucinations instead of kind of just accepting them. They call this thing in meditation like the Teflon mind or the non-stick mind, which is sort of through a practice of regular meditation and gradually kind of training yourself to not react, or to be have equanimity, or become equanimous, they call it, to like unpleasant experiences. So it applies in Buddhism, it applies to pleasant ones as well. I know that is extremely useful also. But it's this kind of non-resistant attitude where you kind of go, okay, there's a demon in the room. All I want is for it not to be there, right? So if it's real, right, you're giving it what it wants. You're being afraid and resisting and trying it and being fearful. So it's just going to stay and feed on you. But B, in a more logical terms, like the more you try and resist that thought, like try and block out something that your brain is generating, like authentically generating, and we know that it's authentically generated in the brain. Whether it's objectively measurable is different, but like, you know for a fact that your brain is generating that because you can perceive it. So to try and just block that out and resist it as if it's not real and like just force it away actually kind of compartmentalizes your psyche, or like shuts down experiences that could otherwise be dealt with more effectively. And then that leads on to the next response to this question as well, but you more effectively deal with it by, rather than being horrified and going, I just want it to go, I want it to stop, obviously for a lot of people that's extremely hard to just not be scared by seeing a demon. Like, most people would be fucking terrified of that, and myself included. But like, leading on to the next question in a second, like, you kind of just you have to get used to it. Like, you have to like just be like, okay, I'm perceiving this, but can it harm me in any real, visceral, real way that will damage me? And I've actually got to the point now in my hallucinations where, like, when I point out to the demon that I can see them, they can see me, but I exist and they exist in a different world. I've had this like go from like this huge roaring monstrous creature into this tiny scared little goblin, and I actually felt quite a lot of compassion for it. So that's why non-resistance can be extremely useful, because it might change the tone of the events, it might change the narrative, and there's lots to be explored with that. I'll be back in 1 second. So another thing I tend to do as an effective tool to navigate my experiences, as was phrased in the earlier part of the video, is to, let's just correlate with what I was saying before, so not only not resist the experiences, but actively induce them. Now, if you suffer from schizophrenia and you're watching this, you know that that's not like A, what you're taught, B, intuitive, C, like something people would willingly do. But for example then, I might go into a spontaneous fearful state, or spontaneously start hallucinating, or become anxious and then hallucinate, and there's a vast number of ways in which these things take place. that vary from situation to situation. But if I sit down in, again, like a kind of meditative process, and say mentally to the room or whatever it is, or to the demons or the angels or whatever it is I might experience in that given situation, like open a dialogue with them and actively kind of like bring those things about. Now, it's horrifying, but in this same sort of tense as the non-resistance thing. It's like, yeah, like with voices, for example, like, this might not be the same for a lot of people, but I found that over years of practice, as soon as you directly like single out like one voice, like one character, and go, what do you want? Like, and just like show no fear, but also show no like, do you know what I mean? Like, kind of just like be completely like equanimous, just completely relaxed in the situation, and just be like, right, I can see you talking to me, I can hear you. What do you want? Like, you're obviously lonely, you're obviously quite malevolent, like, what is the purpose to your existence? Engage with me. And all of a sudden, these voices that have been torturing me for days or hours or weeks or months or years don't have much to say. Or if they do, it's in a totally different vein, because you're not like locking away some little creature in your head to be crushed and crushed and crushed away into nothingness. You're actually inviting them to say their bit, like, and you can even write it down. Like, I'm not saying this is a fun thing to do, I'm not even necessarily recommending it, but it's what has worked to help me sort of, like I said, navigate these experiences. And like, what starts out as some monstrous, horrible projection actually just becomes like your dog or whatever. It's a bit badly trained, it's terrified, or is angry, or is, you know, some disowned part of the self. Is quite a lot of people theorise that, like some part of you that is just so abhorrent to you that you treat it worse, even worse than you treat yourself. Do you know what I mean? Like, and we know, like, a lot, like, psychologically speaking, there's a lot of people that like talk to themselves like shit, but that is nothing on the treatment with which you give things, the apparitions in your mind or whatever. And this deliberate communion or contact, or just not trying to make it not there anymore, just really fizzles out the kind of the tension. Because it's like, if you can't get rid of them, right, here's just a basic answer, like, if you can't get rid of these voices or creatures or whatever, then why are you trying to? Like, if nothing else works, like, just fucking have a chat with them. Like, things might get a little bit easier. And then a third answer, I've just written here, insight and mindfulness meditation. So, we touched briefly on mindfulness meditation, and that's the idea of like observing without judgment, or sitting with without rejection or attraction to any particular thought, emotion, experience. And so mindfulness is like just like, I would recommend it to anyone, regardless of whether you're mentally ill or diagnosed with anything or anything like that. Like, mindfulness has made my life tolerable, for lack of a better way of putting it. Like, my life, you know, my life's going pretty well at the moment, like, contextually speaking. But in regard to symptoms, there's never really going to be any real change, I don't think, in terms of like, it's always going to come up. Like, I haven't had particularly negatively toned hallucinations for quite a while now, but I still have hallucinations, and they still make things complex. It's still an endless minefield trying to navigate it. But when you have these mindfulness techniques of like, okay, so close your eyes, you focus on your breathing, you draw your attention, you train the focus of your mind. And then, on one hand, if you can choose what you focus on, that means you can be less distracted by these hallucinatory distractions. So focusing and learning to focus your mind is incredibly useful. But also, this kind of non-rejection, non-attraction thing is like, you're not seeking after feeling good, you're not seeking away from feeling bad. And it means that, like, you kind of, it gives you a grip, it gives you a baseline from which to build confidence in yourself. And we'll come to that in probably another video, actually, So I'm going to make another one tonight probably, but that's a very important thing. And then regards insight meditation, that's something you'll have to research a bit more for yourself, but the general gist is listening out for what's in your mind, like looking for revelation, like, because for every one of those millions of demonic voices that may appear, or the millions of angelic voices that may appear, there's so many just varied, nuanced aspects of what it can be like to have schizophrenia. There is one voice that talks clearly, calmly, consistently in you, and if you can tune into that, it can make a world of difference in some of the darkest parts of your life. So I'll be back with question 2. So as you'll now see at the top of the screen, we have question 2, sorry. What are the aspects of your experience that you can't simply think away? So what I'm driving at here is like, what are the things that I haven't been able to eradicate simply by training of the mind? I've got 3 answers, which we'll split up again like we did before, but basically telepathy, energy hallucinations, and experiencing that I'm in alternate realities. So for anyone who doesn't experience it, me sitting here saying I experience telepathy, you can kind of objectively measure that you don't experience that. And I kind of know to a certain extent that not everything I experience in could be real, like logically speaking. But that's definitely one thing that like I can't negate in my experience, or the way it appears. As a matter of conscious experience, it's like telepathy. It's a big topic. I've covered it briefly in an old video, but I'm probably going to make a new one about that in the transverbal synesthetic communication. But I'll give you a brief overview of that. Like, so it's sort of like what happened with my psychosis was that like the kind of volume knob on sensory data went straight up past 11 into like the infinites. And everything, I don't know if it was brain damage or something like that, or whether it was just the extreme amount of dopamine and serotonin and all these kind of neurotransmitters that were bursting through my brain. But I basically managed to accidentally dissociated from most of my entire experience. I can say this now because I've kind of had years to navigate it and reflect and dissect it and figure it out, but it was basically like a form of dissociation where I felt I had no ownership over kind of my own thoughts, and put it in like religious terms, it was like, and custom religious terms, it was like the violent loss of self. It was like having everything that made me disappear, like just like it never existed. And I was in an environment and around people and in scenarios and in a life path that wasn't serving me at all, and it led to this violent dissolution of self. But when you are no longer conscious of your own thoughts, your own experience, your own narrative, your own internal narrative is just eradicated, like you end up privy to way more sensory data. Now a lot of that could be thoroughly skewed, so I'm not saying it's perfect or like accurate, but the sheer volume of sensory data that's available appears to be increased, and like yeah, because of the neural activity, there's just more information being processed or available at the conscious level. That's kind of the rationale behind it. That's how I understand it. But and it doesn't always happen to me anymore, which is really good, because I've managed to kind of graft together a mental volume fader back the other way. But it's just things like knowing what people think, or like feeling other people's emotions really extremely. The entanglement between loved ones, and the difference between like the awareness of emotions and thoughts of someone you know really well, which could be explained otherwise, obviously, but like the intensity and vividness with which you feel and experience relatively accurate versions of what other people think, feel, and experience. And there's it. So to come back to the transverbal synesthetic communication thing, it's like if you were to take one further step back into yourself or outside yourself and be able to see the whole totality of the experiences you're having in terms of communication, like so you have, like, even just with verbal communication, you have subverbal, verbal, non-verbal, and then what I call transverbal, which I think I've actually got from somewhere. But like, transverbal communication is basically the inclusion of all forms of auditory communication, and that's just the voice. Like, we're not including body language in that. We're not including empathetic cues. We're not including the mirror neurons. We're not including pheromonal signatures or scent, or if, as I'm sure, I think there's some debate about whether pheromones are detectable by humans, but I would strongly object to the idea that they're not, just because of personal experience and heightened sensory states. And then if you include that, all of that data, like everything, including awareness of your own thoughts, awareness of the projection of other people's thoughts, it kind of creates this transverbal communication that but the synesthesia comes into it in a minute. Transverbal form of communication that goes way beyond like anything you're directly communicating to a kind of knowing of the other being or the person you're communicating with, some like unrestricted level. And I may go into it in other videos about how people without my experience can sort of get into it and practice those things, like the holy moment and stuff like that. I can come back to. But yeah, the synesthetic version of that, or the aspect of that, sorry, that comes into it, is that I have what I believe now to be a kind of emotional synesthesia, where like I get visual hallucinations and combined, like incongruent visual hallucinations with sensory hallucinations, auditory hallucinations, seemingly sensory hallucinations, like scent, olfactory hallucinations, combined with emotional resonance, like a kind of emotional hallucination of like the feeling of what it feels like to be around a certain person, feels a certain way, like they're tuned to a certain frequency. And then you combine all that and you take a dissociated or overly associated version of that and kind of connect all of that together into one image without any concept of self-awareness, or including like a very open or very specific set of conscious aware processes. You end up with transverbal synesthetic communication, which is my form of word or the delineation or explanation for how I experience telepathy. So that's quite long, so we'll come on to the next aspect in just one moment. So part 2 of kind of question 2, which is what are the aspects of your experience you can't think away, it kind of touched on it briefly before in the telepathy thing, but the telepathy thing is about communication. It's about transmission of data or receipt of data or whatever you might call it. But there's an aspect of it I mentioned just a minute ago, like energy hallucinations. So the experience of like not just conscious entities picking up empathetic residue from your mirror neurons and all these like logically identifiable processes, but the kind of like say I'd use this TV remote as a crude example. If I hold this TV remote for a certain period of time, I feel it becomes imbued with a certain thing, and like all my instruments I feel have different characteristics at an energetic level. They feel a certain way, and it's not just about how they've been played, it's about how you've connected with them. And arguably this could just be an associative thing where you kind of work around something so much, you get used to something so much that you ascribe meaning to it. But in my case, there are companies, so like even that remote now, I can still feel like I need to like drain my energy out of it or something, or consciously remove that attachment to it. You get it with people who read tarot cards as well. There's like whether you can touch the deck or how you would. Yeah, they kind of what do they call it? I can't remember the word for it, but it's like when you touch an object and you know something about its owner and stuff like that. And there's aspects of that in my experience. And again, this isn't like something I've kind of willed or learned to do. It's like these are things I naturally observe and then I've like found other people's terminology to describe. And that's something I always reinforce. Like I don't go out looking for more hallucinations or more things to freak out about, because screw that. But yeah, so the energy hallucinations can very much be like, they're more like non-communicative. It's like, where is someone's mind focused? Where is their will force or willpower or energies? Like, what is it focused on? And like how that interacts. And like each room I go in will have an energy, or like each object they interact with will have a certain sentiment to it that is elucidated through visual, auditory, sensory, tactile, olfactory in some cases, hallucinations. Less so olfactory with objects, actually. That seems to be a distinctly conscious, sentient animal, or animal, basically, level of experience. So that kind of, it was briefly covered, because I covered that in the telepathy one anyway, but the last thing on question 2 that I wrote down as an answer was experiencing that I'm in alternate realities. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So now we're back to talk about experiencing that I'm in alternate realities. Now this isn't, it's not something I'm fluently going to be able to talk about, but I can describe what it's like. It might be that, say, a certain colour triggers a certain state of reality, or I might be triggered into a certain reality and then a colour will, it's almost like a lens filter, like, so like light blue, for example, tends to be a kind of very serene, very peaceful, nirvanic kind of state. And then green is a kind of anti-hell. It's like being completely appeased and accepting of your circumstances, even though they could be the worst in the world. That's green. Red is like being very self-identified, very kind of like clung to your own story, very much you know, the soul is a kind of individualistic slice of reality, and this goes on and on and on and on out through various spectrums. Gold is like something that is super special, so I don't even want to talk about it on camera, but that's beautiful. And it's kind of like these filters come down, and then I realise that, yeah, that I've realised over time that they come in when I'm in a certain reality. I also have other realities I may experience, so like when I'm particularly psychotic, like if I'm really agitated or haven't slept, like more of my memory of my dreams come in, and more of my memories of my psychosis comes in. As my meds wear off, I become more aware of, like, as they naturally do throughout the course of a day, if I stay up all night, like I have in this case, yeah, as my meds wear off, I become more aware of all the things that are kind of being like deflected and blocked out of my mind by the medication, or not caring, or where I'm focusing and stuff. And it brings this kind of yeah, so this is something I covered in my Mind of a Mystic channel briefly when I was talking to a friend of mine on one of the interviews there. It's as though when I come into that like comfortable psychotic state, which is a weird thing to say, but like you can be sort of psychotic and calm, like you know, with the non-resistance attitude and all the things discussed earlier in the video. If you, and the deliberate induction as well, you go into that state willfully rather than just constantly trying to suppress and block it down. Like if you actually allow it to come out, like I find that like I remember more of my dreams. So I've got like several realities. I discussed it in the Life is But a Dream video earlier on this channel, sometime last year or the year before. There's like this sense that like there's multiple lives and existences in there that you can actually remember, and this is for most people you actually find if you explore it. This is the case because you get recurrent dream scenarios. You get recurrent scenarios that can have a continuing narrative from dream to dream. So not just in one night, but from like you return to that similar world, and it continues in the narrative of that original story as it was, almost picks up from last time. So you get multiple aspects of reality based on the dream world. You get multiple aspects of reality based on like psychotic states, where like I might remember more trauma or more joy or more like of the weirder things that have ever happened to me that are normally suppressed by my medication. And this is why it's a difficult thing for me to talk about, because it's tender, it's a difficult subject, but there is very much the experience that there's blissful and heavenly and just the most utterly fearful, hateful realities as well that you can step into, and I have the different filters that sort of either they come over and I'm like, oh okay, so like now I'm in kind of like a brownie gold, for example, and it's that like, and there's a hint of red there as well, because I'm talking about myself individualistically and profiting from my own ideas, whatever. The point being that like I experience like these filters that either cue me to realise that I've gone into that state, or come in just coinciding perfectly with the entering into that state, and I can interact with those different levels of reality, and they're accompanied by different ranges of thoughts, different sensory perceptions, different frameworks for understanding reality, and I can kind of like woven a thread through all of them through my meditation practice, so I can be kind of have a congruent, consistent continuity of reality, across many different states. And it's kind of like, if you imagine you're just like this one needle hole, and there's all these holes around you that could go through, and your conscious memory, or specifically memory, kind of weaves a thread through all these different states, and you can induce it with different kind of trance states, or like in my case psychotic states as well, where you can kind of build a bigger picture about the things that exist in your subconscious and unconscious, well maybe not unconscious because that's unconscious, but in your subconscious world, like in your subconscious life. So that's a little bit about like alternate realities. Like some of them are very real, like lucid dream state where you go, and then the hyper real lucid dream state where you travel literally to other whole congruent realities that have new laws of physics and all this kind of stuff. But that sort of, like, you know, we were talking about the question here was what are the aspects you can't think away. I cannot stop experiencing telepathy. I cannot stop experiencing energy hallucinations, even if I feel great about them. They don't stop. And experiencing that I am in or are able to navigate or go through different realities has never really stopped. So that's question 2 complete. So to start question 3, I might have to restart this one, we don't know, who we'll soon find out, is what have you learned about reality in the mind that is beneficial in relation to your schizophrenia? So this is quite a complex question to answer, and I've given myself 6 points to cover here. And some of these apply specifically to people with mental health issues or with schizophrenia, in case some of them apply to like philosophy or Buddhism or navigating reality, or just truisms or truths about reality. So the first response I've given is reality and our image of ourselves and relationship to it is illusory. So that's why I'm talking about Buddhism. It's basically like, before I'd ever even heard the word Buddhist in anything other than like the word meditation, or like been shown, because we did meditation in school, but that was like Catholic kind of prayer and meditation, so it wasn't quite the same. But at no point did it come up in Catholic high school that like the world is an illusion. But that was a spontaneous revelation of my psychosis. Like, so basically, like, I went to the point of like, so everything was so fantastically horrible, like so phantasmagorically abhorrent, that I couldn't believe it was real. And so much of what we do, so much of what we think, so much of what we experience is a conditioned response. And when you drop into that kind of selfless, however violently or pleasantly, however it manifests for you, however it works out for you, is great. But like the very visceral lack of self kind of makes you realize that so much of what makes up our reality is in here. Like we know scientifically speaking that like our perception of the world around us is a hallucination. It's a projected reality that we create in our brains to help us navigate it. It's nothing like what's actually outside of us, but it's a good enough representation that we can survive. We're optimized for our own survival and health, like the fact we can see colour because we're omnivores, so that we can survive, navigate different plants, so we know whether they're poisonous or food, or recognise them, or whether they're beneficial, whereas like a carnivore might see in black and white. Just an example like that. But yeah, so reality, and I also said, and the image of ourselves. So like how we perceive ourselves, and then the next part is our relationship to reality. Is all an illusion. Again, it's a difficult one to talk about, and it's something you can explore for yourself. But I think there's something very fundamental about the fact that when you lose all conception of yourself, like everything you think that you are is destroyed, yet you retain consciousness, that leads to a heck of a lot of like novel experiences. In my case, being plunged into hell and then ascending to heaven and wobbling in back and forth and somewhere in purgatory, and who knows. But our image of ourselves, the idea we have about ourselves, is so fundamentally skewed, and I'm not sure whether it's a social, like a societal conditioning. I'm not sure whether it's our whole society, our whole world is just made to make us think like that these days, because like a lot of people, when they remove themselves from it, cease to think that way. But it's kind of like, yeah, it's like the idea you have about yourself in your brain, like I am David, I do this schizophrenic channel, I am wearing a purple on my shirt, I am this, that, the other, like these are all basically repetitive thoughts in your head. Like it's just, they're based on the memory and the position you're positing around your reality. So we know, for example, again referencing neuroscience, like if you remove, I can't remember what it is, I think it's like hippocampus, like if you damage a certain area of the brain, people cease to be able to recognize people. Simple as that. So if you don't recognize anyone, which is something I've experienced, possibly because of brain damage, but when I was psychotic, like in fact that's probably quite a good explanation, but like I recognized people, but the idea that they were really them was disappeared. It's almost like they were a parody of the person I thought that I remembered. Like it was like they weren't really real. So possibly that can be explained by brain damage in whatever area of the brain that's governed by, and I might do some research into that. But yeah, in general speaking, like our perception of reality is false, because you can retain consciousness once you dissolve it all and you realise that there's way weirder shit going on than you realised in the first place, and that people are just bizarre creatures, like and so that kind of came as a spontaneous revelation in terms of like I recoiled in horror, and then I realised there was nowhere to recoil to, and that just like all the rules I knew about reality, other than like physics and stuff like that, which you can rationally learn that that matter isn't solid and stuff like that, but you kind of get like the actual actualization of the idea that like we're just basically like electrical energy floating in a void, like, and I've had very visceral hallucinations of that exact thing. Like I call it the electrical fire of Christ consciousness. It's just basically like being submerged in infinite space, like a present living space that is electrostatic and it's moving, it's charged. It looks a bit like kind of being immersed in white noise, but it's not white, it's like green in my case. When I'm usually gone into that, it's like a really deep green. But it's like being immersed in an infinite void of white noise that's really present and conscious and aware, and that you exist within that and connect with it and stuff like that. So that's kind of what gives me that ability to realise that there's more to me than I realise, and also that now on everything about me can be erased, and I can, until I die, or like just my brain is destroyed or something, or at least can be skewed so I'm not aware of it, and that you still retain conscious experience. Like my son, for example, like, or children in general, like they don't form memories in the same way we do. Like most people don't remember being 1 year old because they haven't got the, again, I think it's the hippocampus or certain areas in the brain anyway, that like register memory. So they have like what's called emotional memory, but they don't have like long-term functional memories from that age, unless trauma has happened or something like that, which is obviously biologically developed because you need to be able to remember trauma so you know how to avoid it. So that makes sense. But yeah, all these kind of things are an illusion. It's not to say that this reality doesn't exist. That's a very different premise and statement to make. But that reality itself is an illusion, because the way, in the terms of how we perceive it and how we think about it, that can all be changed, that can all be eradicated, that can be moved, that can be switched. It's all a hallucination. Basically, that summarises my response here. Everything is a hallucination, and the way we consider ourselves in relation to this reality, when we realise that, radically shifts. So if I think of anything else, I'll come back and fill it in, but I'll be back with the next answer to this question. So I kind of reviewed that, and I guess that's kind of where I wanted to go with that for now. These are more just statements about things. The following responses, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 responses, and the kind of statements about things you learn more in relation to like mental health in general as an issue, rather than like, so the last answer was about like something fundamentally that changed about me as a person because of my schizophrenia for the positive, or like that had positive consequences. It wasn't necessarily pleasant, but so the next answer I've given is that there are many different ways to run from your thoughts, and we kind of touched on this earlier in the episode about like, well, episode talking about how like non-resistance, basically the funny thing about being resistant to thoughts is that you can get really good at it. Like you can really, this kind of comes into this our relationship with reality that I was previously talking about, like a lot of people, even people that aren't delusional, aren't damaged in any way technically speaking or whatever, can become incredibly efficient at not being aware of the truth of their experience. Like complete lack of intellectual self-honesty, like just drive away all thoughts that contradict what I think. And a lot of people are delusional, basically, and that's kind of what I'm saying. Like there's like I for a number of years became incredibly efficient at blocking out traumatic memories, for example, and that's like a impulse reaction, like that happens naturally as part of my cognitive development, but also like a lot of willful suppression because I couldn't face the trauma of what I experienced and stuff like that. There's like, yeah, there's just an endless plethora of ways to avoid facing the truth of your situation, and that when you stop doing that, it can be cataclysmic or joyful. You know, these things don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive either. You can be cataclysmically joyful or joyfully cataclysmic. Like, but yeah, just basically, there's an incredibly large number of ways you can avoid facing reality, and over time, you eventually either have to face up to it or it kills you. Basically, that's my gist for that. The next answer I've given is slightly cynical, but medical science is unable to do anything other than address symptoms. So that's actually something that, for medical science specifically as well, like there is no pill that is going to make you not schizophrenic. And when they invent it, sign me up, send one over, I'll try it. If it works, joy to the world. But it's kind of like, a friend of mine described this beautifully. It's like at the moment we're sort of just like grabbing a whole bunch of neurotransmitters or suppression of neurotransmitters or a chemical compound and just throwing it in the general direction of like the things we think are disruptive. Like I gather the D2 receptor, which is a dopamine receptor, and 5-HT2A, which is a serotonin receptor, are the most commonly associated with psychotic symptoms. Yet, there's barely any medications that target specifically that, so it has a knock-on effect on a whole bunch of other receptors. And B, sort of forget my train of thought, but it's basically like you kind of bludgeon all around the area, and by proxy, it does the right job. And like that's not an insult to the people doing it. This is incredibly difficult science. It's just that like. Yeah, so I said, like, medical science is naturally unable to do anything other than address symptoms. Basically, the job of pills, and to a lesser degree psychiatrists, is to fix the symptoms. And we live very much in a culture where I've been lucky not to have apathetic psychiatrists and things like that. I've actually been extremely lucky with all of the people I work with in mental health. In their own way, have been like profoundly useful, and I'm honoured to have had them help me. So just to clarify that, you know, like I haven't been neglected or mistreated. It's such a complex issue that it's like you spend your whole life patching up the symptoms and never really been able to figure out the cause with schizophrenia. So that's kind of what I'm saying there. Like, medical science is limited in its capacity to actually resolve anything to do with schizophrenia, as far as I'm aware and concerned with it. And then the next answer to that is that so just to reiterate the question, it's like, what have you learned about the mind in reality that is beneficial in relation to schizophrenia? Is that we are the only ones who can truly heal ourselves. Now, that sounds like a bit of a cliche or like a kind of trite statement to make, but I actually feel like with something like schizophrenia, like, how are other people who, because even within schizophrenics it's so much variation about what they actually hallucinate, how they rationalize, how they contextualize, how they filter, how they process what they experience. And it's like you have to be courageous and you have to be willing to kind of challenge yourself, and you have to be able to do the things that you know will make you heal. Like, and no one can come into you, no one can enter your mind, just go beep 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 boop, throw a load of chemicals at it, suddenly you're normal again. Like, you have to heal yourself, and that's empowering as much as it is terrifying, like, because there's no one that can help you but you, but also, like, you're the only one that can do it, so you better fucking do it. Like, do you know what I mean? And in context of that, one of my other responses to this question is that belief is an all-powerful force. Like, and just to get again slightly trite with this, like, everything that's ever happened in human history has started with a belief. And me learning to manage the fact that I'm just sat here talking coherently to a camera, granted I'm on my own, it's the middle of the night, so it's not really a terrifying situation for me, even though I'm low on meds in my system and stuff. But you get the idea. Like, everything that anyone has ever achieved started with belief. Like, and for me, the turning point for me was like, because I'm not recovered from schizophrenia, I don't think that's an option, but I have learned to navigate it like a professional. And I'm actually writing a book at the moment based on that idea called the Black Book, and there's a correlating book called the White Book. I might talk about that a bit at the end, but the Black Book talks about, like, from the non-psychotic, well, the psychotic actually, sorry, rather than psychic. So the explanation of what rationally I think is going on, what the mechanisms are. Like, I'm talking on this channel quite a lot. It's just like a non-fiction novella length novel style book I'm working on. But yeah, everything in human history started with belief, and for me, learning to navigate my symptoms came when I was just like, you know what, I don't want to be schizophrenic anymore. I don't like it. It's like being told you've got terminal cancer. it's inevitable, it's degenerative, and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, I remember this turning point where I was just said one day, I was on a particular road in my home, the town where I live, and I was just like, yeah, fuck this. I don't accept this. Like, and if you, as soon as you start believing that you can fix it, like, I'm not cured. I still have to take meds. I still have to see psychiatric people to help maintain my condition. I have panic attacks, I have anxiety and stuff like that. But I'm not in a mental hospital. I haven't been since I first got diagnosed, and that's like 11 years ago, 12 years ago. And I'm quite proud of that. Like, because a lot of people are resubmitted, and I attribute a lot of the reason I haven't been resubmitted to that belief that, belief itself is powerful and that you can heal yourself. Like, I'm not better. Like, if it's like good or bad, I'm still bad. But like, I'm getting to be what I consider to be a professional at navigating my own waking nightmare. Like, I'm getting good at it. So I may still be suffering, but I'm getting good at navigating that suffering, And it all starts with the belief, so I want to emphasise that. And then the last one I put here is that powerful emotions are the cause of delusions. This is also going to be in the Black Book, so it's probably good that we ended that, because I want to get a little bit into that, but like, because there's a whole chapter on delusions and the formation of delusions, and there's a few allegorical stories, and it kind of talks you through the basics of how hallucinations and delusions can form, or hallucinations based on delusions and stuff like that, or vice versa. But also that, like, a powerful emotional response can lead you to believe something is true when it's not. And that's something that I've learned that's profoundly beneficial in overcoming schizophrenia, and actually helping a lot of other people in other areas of their life that don't have schizophrenia. Because recognizing that a power, like say something like infidelity or like paranoia about someone cheating, like, this is like a common thing for so many people. Like, not a lot of people, but like, infidelity and the issues surrounding infidelity and insecurity about it are rife in the world. Not so much my world, which I'm very happy about, but in general, like, it's something, jealousy, basically, greed and jealousy, like this kind of like, the power of like fear and revulsion and emotion. And I discuss this in one of the examples in the book. It's just a crude example. Basically, the power of the emotion can override all the extra information in your head, all the good things that person's done, all the reassurances you've got, all the valid reasons to trust that person. You might override that and become delusional about whether they're being faithful, and that can happen to anyone. You don't have to be mentally ill. And that powerful emotions are the key to causing delusions, and B, to overcoming delusions. So either diffusing the emotion, making it so mundane and boring and natural and everyday that it just diffuses and you no longer care, or you make a contrary delusion or a powerful belief system based on the truth that overrides the other mental structure in that belief system. So that's been a long one. My voice is a little dry now, and I've got a few more things I want to film tonight. So I'm going to say thank you for watching. This has been episode 3 of Ask Schizo. I hope it's been informative, and I'll catch you on the other side. Peace.